Okay, our speaker today is Diana Withee. So Diana is an art historian who has been doing research on the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch for more than a decade, based on discoveries that she made about the painter while a graduate student. Diana received a BA in art history from Pomona College, Claremont, California, and an MA from Tulane University in New Orleans, and a PhD ABD from the University of Maryland, College Park. She has worked in the education departments at the National Gallery of Art, the Hillwood Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C., and in curatorial affairs at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. She has also taught art history courses at Tulane University in New Orleans, Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland, and the Bishop School here in La Jolla, as well as for the Navy through their Central Texas College program, which included teaching art history on an aircraft carrier, which must have been really fun.
It was.
So you can see on the screen the title of her talk, and I will then turn it over to Diana.
My talk is based on, it's going to be a little different than the presentation I did at the 5th International Hieronymus Bosch Conference at the Hieronymus Bosch Art Center in 's in the Netherlands, May 13th, 2023. I talked about Hieronymus Bosch's Saint-Germain-en-Laye conjurer, autograph, workshop, or follower. Can the unrecognized subject determine the authorship? And the reason that I said that is because this is a painting that was thrown out in 2016 as being by Bosch, by the Bosch Research and Conservation Project, which was a group funded by the Dutch government to go and look and technologically examine every work that is either by Bosch himself, the workshop, or followers. And what they were trying to do is determine which were actually by Bosch and which were not. And so this is the one of them that they said it was not. And of course, it's long been a favorite of people because it's an interesting painting. And but my contention is that you don't know, nobody knows except me what it's really about. And it's so complicated that there's no way that somebody besides Bosch could have done this painting. And so that's basically what I'm going to talk about. All right, so how do I get to the next?
Click the right arrow on your slide. I mean, on your keyboard. Click the right arrow on your keyboard. See if that does.
Oh, I mean, I am, but it's not doing anything.
By the down arrow? The down arrow?
Yeah, no. Let's see. Ah, there we go. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you at SDIS because this group has been very supportive for many years of my work and travels focusing on the artist Hieronymus Bosch. It's been a project that I've had to play very close to the vest because I uncovered one of the keys to unlocking one of the doors that has kept us from understanding the work of this fascinating artist, and many others are still trying to find this information. Judging from the many copies of certain paintings after his death in 1516, Bosch was very popular all over Europe until about 1650. Those who did I always wondered, did those who purchased his paintings understand what they were really about? Well, we have no idea, of course, but critics started writing about him in 1563, but it seems by then any knowledge about the meaning of some of his most important works was lost. And so far, most have never been recovered. There are literally thousands of books and articles have been written about Bosch's work, to the point where he's considered the most written about artist in the world, but he remains the most misunderstood. Basically, I have been trying to show through the two paintings that I presented, the Escorial, Christ Carrying the Cross, which I presented at the third Bosch conference in 2012, and then the Conjurer, which I presented last May, and I presented to the Bosch conferences, and now I'm presenting to SDIS. That much as that has been written about Hieronymus Bosch's paintings is wrong, and I feel like this guy, the cartoon. Yes, you're all wrong. Some of what I proposed in the first paper about the Escorial, Christ Carrying the Cross in 2012 was accepted by the Bosch Research and Conservation Project, which I was thrilled about, but not all of it. The second paper on the Saint-Germain-en-Laye Conjurer revealed more about the true nature of some of his paintings. However, my presentation was on a painting that had been dismissed from the accepted works by the Bosch Research and Conservation Project, which I'll refer to as a BRCP. So I had an uphill battle, and I'm not sure any of my new and radical ideas got through to anyone, but I'm going to share it with you anyway and let you decide. What I've been trying to do in these papers is to get Bosch scholars to see that what Bosch was trying to do is he didn't just go into his study, sit down at his easel, and produce, with the aid of a vivid imagination, I admit, some downright strange but magnificent works which continue to puzzle us today. I've been trying to point out that at least some of them are about people and events that occurred during his lifetime, and that these people, possibly the patrons of the work, can sometimes be found in the paintings. To be sure, there are many portraits of donors who appear with their wives and children, like this famous work by Hugo van der Goes called the Portinari altarpiece, which is now in the Uffizi. It was done in the Netherlands, but it shows this Tommaso Portinari right here with his two sons, and then it shows his wife over here with her daughter, and then it shows their patron saints. That's usually how, and then of course you have the holy scene in the center, and that's how most altarpieces and paintings of a religious nature are done. It's supposed to show their religious devotion, but it doesn't show them as taking part in what's going on, and that's where what Bosch is doing that's a little different. But this, in the Christ Carrying the Cross, Bosch, and even when Bosch he did two other works of the Christ Carrying the Cross. They're more like the traditional work, such as this painting, this engraving is by the master of Baden, Pink of Baden, done about 1480. And what you see here is you see a huge mass of people. Here's Christ with the cross, but there's all sorts of yapping dogs, and there's all these soldiers. They're nasty and snarling, and they have all of these spears. And then when you look at this one, what I was trying to say is I think that this has a completely different feeling. It's much calmer. The painting itself is quite monumental. It's one of the largest religious paintings that he had done, and it actually seems more festive. You see, a trumpet here and a flag. When I showed this to one of the people in Bergen op Zoom, because I said I think this is Jan Mettenlippen, the Lord of Bergen op Zoom. His name is Jan II van Gleems. And she said, "Oh, I know what that is. That's a Holy Cross procession." And I said, "Well, are they?" She said, "They had them all over the Netherlands." And I said, "Well, is this one very special?" But the one that they had in Bergen op Zoom. And she said, "Yes, this was very special." Because it was one of the biggest ones, and they put money into it. and that this man, Jan van Gleems, even gave up some of the money that he made from their international fairs to support this procession. So that's perhaps why that they wanted him to be remembered. And I think this is supposed to be the town of Bergen op Zoom in the background. He was Lord of Bergen op Zoom. And here he is, and he's shown, he's got a very large nose. He has a large nose here. One of the differences, he does not have a diseased lower lip, which this man did have. He was called Jan met een lippen, Jan with the big lips. But in 1491-92, he was cured. And I think, and in the painting, they were able to change it. He had originally been shown wearing a beard that sort of covered up his mouth. And then the artist went back and shows him clean shaven. So I think that means that the painting was underway when he had this miraculous cure of his lip that he'd suffered with for years and years. And that's why, and so that's why I'm dating this painting at 1491-92, because I think it happened just as he was cured from this disease of the lower lip. So these processions were done all over the Netherlands, and the other thing that Bosch does, and he does this all the time, he will show you, put something in that relates to something about you, but it's not obvious. So he shows him as a pilgrim, which he was in 1452, and that was a great jubilee year. He went to Rome and then to the Holy Land, which really set him apart because it wasn't very easy to get to the Holy Land, as you can well imagine. It cost a lot of money. And you were called a Jerusalem brother if you did this. And there was a special group of people that had made it to the Holy Land. So he's showing him as a pilgrim. And then this man over here, I can't see it very well, but it's got the crescent of the Muslims. And so that's an indication that, he went to the Holy Land. And the other thing is this pheasant feather, which indicates that he was involved in the Duke of Burgundy's Feast of the Pheasant, when 100 of the Duke's closest friends got together, and the Duke was going to persuade them to mount a crusade to the Holy Land. This never came to pass, but it was considered the party of the age. So that's what he's telling you. He's in these very subtle ways, he's giving you clues about the person's status, or things that they did. And he's going to do this on the conjurer as well. Well, we know more about Bosch and his work than we know more now and than we did in the last few centuries, because there's been a lot of archival research about Bosch and his family and the efforts of the BRCP. And so while I don't agree with all of the conclusions of the BRCP, I'm not alone in this, I think their examination of the Escorial Christ carrying the cross, which was long overlooked because it wasn't very important, because it didn't have any of the Boschian devils or monsters or hell scenes. And they realized it was entirely from the hand of Bosch, and it was the most monumental of his religious paintings that we know of. And so while they did agree with my suggestion, though, that this was not a typical Christ carrying the cross, but rather a depiction of a Holy Cross procession, they also stated, well, the original destination is not known. So they ignored my identification of Jan II van Gleems in this painting. But the Prado catalog on the Bosch exhibit of big exhibition in 2016, and the Prado has the most Bosch paintings of any organization in the museum in the world. They did put out that I had identified this person, so it's a start. Anyway, but I think that that the fact that the Bosch Research and Conservation Project said that Bosch was doing a painting about a current event, which they've never done before. it's all been religious or abstract stuff, you know, that doesn't have anything to do with their life as they led it in those days. And so this opens the way for my interpretation of this other painting, the Saint-Germain-en-Laye Conjurer, which I think was done for another member of this Van Gleam's family. And it refers to events in this person's life. First, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the relative chronology set out by the BCRP. It's from rough groupings of their accepted paintings. And the works do seem to follow a logical development from him being Bosch being a provincial artist doing somewhat uninspired traditional religious works into a very popular, innovative artist known for demons, monsters, and hell scenes. On inventory lists in the Habsburg Burgundian nobles who owned his work, they seem to have held him in high esteem. He was often simply referred to by only his first name, Hieronymus, a sure sign of his celebrity to those people in these elite circles. Well, Europe about this time looks about the same, except of course you've got the Holy Roman Empire here, which controlled a great deal of Western Europe, even down into, they controlled the Netherlands, most of Germany, and parts of Italy. And then you also see that Venice is, my arrow go, is divided up into the Kingdom of Naples, Papal States, and the Republic of Venice, and also part of the Holy Roman Empire. And this is actually very important for the story of the Conjurer. Amazingly enough, doesn't seem like it should be, but whatever. Anyway, so the Netherlands, or the Low Countries, were they owed a nominal allegiance mainly to the Holy Roman Empire, where parts of it, such as the province of Flanders, let's see if I can get, owed allegiance to, to France. And this divided loyalty caused a lot of problems, but the Netherlands were far enough away from these central powers that they were able to grow independent and learn to govern themselves. This, together with the ease of communication made possible by their rivers and canals, and through their hard work and industriousness, they achieved a fairly high standard of living and gained freedoms that other areas could not match. The Netherlands became one of the most densely populated, urbanized areas in Western Europe, second only to northern Italy. From about 1419 to 1467, under the leadership of this man, Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, they had years of prosperity, which flowered into a golden age. Wonderful works of art were created: paintings, tapestries, prints, books, architecture, and sculpture from the likes of Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden, and Dirk Bouts, and many others. It was into this sophisticated culture that Hieronymus Bosch, van Aachen, also known as Bosch, was born in the town of 's-Hertogenbosch. So what happened was that his grandfather, Jan, a painter, immigrated from Nijmegen, which is in the Duchy of Gelders, and his family came down and settled in 's-Hertogenbosch. This Jan van Aachen had 5 or 6 children, 5 sons and a daughter, and all of his painters, except maybe one, they were all painters. Nijmegen was a town that was known for producing exceptional artists such as the Limburg brothers. Now, by the way, this is the little town of Bergen-op-Zoom, which is where I think his main patrons came from. This is where the Van Gleam's family were the rulers. So they're really not very far from each other. So Nijmegen produced the artists that went to the work for the kings of the King of France. And this is for the Duke of Berry. This is the Très Riches Herbes, which is the most important illuminated manuscript ever done in the Middle Ages. So and they produce a lot of artists like this. So Nijmegen was probably a little crowded, and you've got this other group of, a man with 6 kids And he saw Bosch as a place where there weren't very many artists. I think there were 3 registered. And so he brought his family there because he felt like they had a big church that was still being built, and they had a lot of convents and monasteries there, so that there was probably a lot of opportunities, as he saw it, for them to grow rich. But I don't think that actually happened. But at any rate, so he probably was seeking greener pastures for this large families, and they seem to be only journeyman painters because they really didn't do anything notable, and we don't have. I don't think we have anything. Maybe one fresco in the Church of St. John's, but they're not even sure of that. But there is. This is an Ecce Homo. A little painting that they think was done by Bosch's workshop, and the style is similar to what Bosch was doing early on. But and when you look at some of his other paintings. Oh, I wanted to talk about his house. One of the grandfather managed to buy a house at one point in the 1430s, and then he lost it right away, and then rented it and lived there the rest of his life. So, but his son Antonius, who is the father of Bosch, somehow came into some money, and he bought this house on the market square right here, still there today. And this is what it looked like back in their day, when they still had wooden fronts, but they had one too many fires, and eventually you had to get rid of the straw roofs, and you had to make stone facades so it wasn't so easily burned. But what's happened in the last year is that the Bosch Center bought this house, and they made it into another exhibition space for Bosch. And it has an elevator, and you can walk up the same stairs that Bosch used to walk up, which I think was very exciting for me to do. Anyway, so this is an adoration of the Magi, and it's one of the first paintings, the earliest painting that has been accepted by Bosch. And you can see he has a wonderful landscape, which shows a lot of promise, but he's not very good he's trying to do some perspective here, and it doesn't work very well. And the building's far too big. And this covering that's supposed to be an honor cloth to kind of protect the Virgin and Child doesn't really do a very good job of it. But he's showing off some of his ability to do these, fancy gold pieces. And the figures are pretty awkward. So it's probably done 1470 to 80 is what they think. And then comes maybe 10, 20 years later, a painting that's accepted by the Bosch Research and Conservation Project as by Bosch. And it's still a little awkward. The landscape is better, but it shows that he's developing to a greater capacity. And then comes this work, and you can see the figures are much more monumental. The landscape is even better. He's got much more control over his technique and the coloring. It's really a beautiful painting. So this is 1491-92. And then comes along this painting, which is the Prado Adoration of the Magi. And this is a very odd painting, frankly. I mean, these got, very beautifully painted monumental figures with this wonderful drapery, but that's very all still and calm. But then you've got, look at this, this roof is held on by this little stick, and it looks like it's going to collapse on the Virgin and Child any minute now. And the other thing is you've got these strange things on the hems of the garments of some of the Magi, where you've got some of these monsters. And then you have over here, there's one of the gifts that they're giving the Christ child, which is the sacrifice of Abraham's sacrifice. But you've got underneath, there are these ugly looking frogs that are holding it up. And so you've got all these sort of offsetting. I mean, most people say you just get a feeling of evil from this, and that's not what you're supposed to be. in the Adoration of the Magi. It's supposed to be, and then there's this figure, which people, all art historians except me and two other people, say is, they say it's the Antichrist, and I say it's obviously Herod, but they're not going to. So that's one of the things I'm writing about in my book. But he's half naked. He's got this ugly sore on his leg, and he looks really. The whole thing is he's wearing this spiky crown, and then he's got these ugly looking men peering out from the background. What is going on here? I mean, this is a typical Adoration of the Magi, where you have a lot of times you will have this is by Roger van der Weyden, and I think it's about 1455, and you have the Magi that this might be, people have identified this as the Duke of Burgundy's son, who's called Charles the Bold, but they're dressed up in all their finery and they have their retinues with them and so on and so forth. It's usually a very joyous painting, but not with Bosch. So, and we think that a lot of these images, they come from manuscript illumination, and in manuscripts you might have the central scene on a illuminated page of the birth of the Virgin or something like that. Then around the edges you have all these little weird things, and they're done, they're just done for private people, because a manuscript is a hand done book, and it's bought and sold to usually give to a noble or somebody of fairly high status, and they put all these little funny decorations in them, and it's to sort of amuse them. And that's where you get them. You don't see them in regular paintings, but suddenly here comes Bosch and he's putting them in regular paintings. Well, then you get the adoration, the temptation of Saint Anthony, and basically they suddenly burst forward. This one was done about the last one was about 1495, 97. And then in 1501, you get this painting that has these wonderful landscapes, which I've done a lot of work on thanks to SDIS, and I can identify where these places are. And what he's doing basically is he gives you the background of what is taking place in the foreground, but in the foreground he puts all these crazy characters, fish boats, and a drake that looks like a priest, and on and on. And you just, people have written many books about this. And it was basically, there is the temptation of Saint Anthony, who was a saint, that an early Christian saint that lived in the Egyptian desert in about 300 AD. So he was a real person, and his life was written about. And they said at one point he was lifted up in the air either by angels or by devils, and then he was thrown down and he was unconscious, and his friends found him and they picked him up. You see here they're picking up a guy that could barely walk, and then they take him either back home, depending on the legend, or they take him to the ruins of a Roman castle, Roman fort, which I'm sure there were plenty of in Egypt in those days. And then he is met by what they call the Devil Queen, who tries to persuade Saint Anthony to marry her and take over her kingdom because her husband died, and he doesn't want to do that, and so she tries to rip off his clothes, and he backs away, and she turns into a devil. So that's what's supposed to be going on here. Other people have called this a Black Sabbath or Witches' Sabbath or whatever. It has absolutely nothing to do with any of that, but you'll have to read my book to find out. But this is one of the main things that I deal with in my book, is this painting. And it's really, there's quite a story behind it. Anyway, and then there's comes about 1510, 1516, there is the Hay Wain. And it's another one of these things where he has this wonderful landscapes in the background, and then all of these bizarre figures plus human figures. But and again, it's about something that happened. but people don't seem to realize that. And then comes this painting they used to think was the last painting that Bosch did. This is the famous Garden of Earthly Delights. Usually when I say I work on Bosch, and people say, well, who is that? You know, your dishwashers or spark plugs? I say, the guy, the painting with all the naked people in the middle. Oh, yes, I know that. So this is really his most famous painting. I think it's about a wedding. And when they went to study it and looked at the dendrochronology, which is the dating of the wood panels, they always thought it would be about 1516, right before he died. And when they got it, it was 1466 to 68, which Bosch would have been about 16 or 18 years old. So they have decided, with not very good evidence as far as I'm concerned, that it's actually 1495 to 1500, but I don't believe a word of it. I think it is a late painting. There's something in here that indicates to me that it was probably late. So that's kind of a rough idea of Bosch's development. Of course, there are a lot of other paintings that are just, basically strictly religious that I'm not talking about, but this is sort of, how he goes from being a pretty traditional painter to doing stuff that's very strange. I mean, you have to admit, it's all very strange. Now, this one looks, it looks, people have said, well, it's a genre scene, or maybe it's about alchemy, or it's astrology, or what have you. And of course, it has nothing to do with any of that. One art historian said, well, this is Bosch because he married a wealthy woman. He's now a part of the urban patriciate. And he's looking down his nose at street people like the conjurer who would, travel from town to town, one step ahead of the law, playing these tricks on people and trying to steal their purses and so on and so forth. And of course, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. Get ahead of myself. Anyway, so the conjurer was found in the Municipal Museum of Saint-Germain-en-Laye outside of Paris in the late 19th century and has been popular ever since. It's actually been stolen a couple of times in France. Owing to its simple style and composition, any viewer can understand what's going on. Before a crowd of onlookers, a conjurer plays the game of cups and balls on a mark, while the mark's purse, as you can see here, is being stolen by the accomplice of the conjurer. The museum had categorized it as a work by Lucas van Leyden, but a Belgian art historian recognized it as a Bosch. But since then, there have been many discussions on whether or not it's early, late, or by the workshop or a follower. The dendrochronology dates the wood panels as being ready for use between 1496 to 1502. In other words, either in the middle or towards the end of Bosch's career. Recently, a Dutch art historian, Paul van den Broek, wrote that this was a later pseudo-archaic forgery of a Bosch prototype, possibly painted on an old panel in the second quarter of the 16th century. The BRCP concurred, removing it from Bosch's oeuvre and adding that Bosch's invention is likely to have been much more complex in its imagery than the surviving painting. Well, obviously, I disagree with this. I think that much of the conjurer, though, was left to Bosch's workshop. He did have these two nephews that we know were working with him. And I will also show that it could not have been painted before March 1509. It was at that time, Bosch, did have these two nephews who were working with him, and he was at the height of his popularity. So he probably left much of the work to these nephews. However, when the real subject is revealed, it's obviously such a complex, unusual painting that it could have only been conceived by the mind of Hieronymus Bosch. In addition, there are some changes to the underdrawings, which is always an indication that it's not just a copy because the master is still adjusting certain images. Also, there are references to other Bosch paintings. Both of these characteristics are very typical of Bosch in all of his work. And in one particular passage, a great deal of care is taken in the creation of one of the figures, and I will suggest there are documented reasons for this. Scholars have suggested that it's about astrology, alchemy, an early genre painting about bourgeois norms. The only couple that looks like they're aristocrats is this couple at the end right here, dressed in very elegant clothes. And that's because they're shown as aristocrats. In fact, all of these people are aristocrats who fortunately like to have their portraits painted so we can identify them. And in some cases, Bosch has chosen to clothe them in dress referring to their particular circumstances at specific times of their lives. So sometimes I'll show you a portrait. It doesn't look exactly like the person, but he's used the clothing to identify the person. So people at the time maybe didn't recognize these people immediately, but the people in that crowd knew, of course, exactly who they were and what this was about. Well, one of the things I'll have to explain is a little bit about the nobility of Burgundy in France, because this is basically what the Conjurer is about. In France, in the mid 14th century, there was a king named John the Good. He had 4 sons, the Charles and Louis and Jean, who was the one that they were very greedy, that stole from the French people, but whatever. But they were great art patrons. He's responsible for the Angers Apocalypse tapestry. If you ever get to Angers, you should go and see it. It's really a fabulous work of art that we're lucky to still have just even pieces of it. He was responsible for the Tréguier of the Dukes of Berry. And then this is Philip the Good, who, if you've ever been to Dijon and seen any of the architecture and the sculpture that was produced in his lifetime, he was responsible for that. So, I mean, and he founded the first library, royal library for the crown of France. Well, he died fairly young, and his son had bouts of madness. And this son had a younger brother named the Duke of Orleans, who was quite the rake. And the son of this man, who is named John the Fearless, got into it over women or whatever, or he was spending most of the money. He got hold of the money when his brother became king and left these people out, and they didn't like it very much, as you can well imagine. Anyway, John the Fearless arranged to have the Duke of Orleans murdered and in the streets of Paris, and you can still go to the spot where he was murdered. It's really quite something. Anyway, so it's cousin against cousin, and the family was, they were not very pleased with each other, really divided them up. Well, he dies, and his son Charles VII takes over. Now, Charles VII is the one that had to fight to get the English out of France, and it was Joan of Arc that helped Charles VII. In the meantime, this man's son, whose name was Charles of Orleans, was taken prisoner at the Battle of Agincourt and spent about, 30 or 40 years in England waiting to be ransomed, but his family couldn't afford it. But this man, the son of John the Fearless, did ransom him and brought him back home to sort of patch things up between the two families. And one of the things that happened was that the reason this man was called Charles the Bold was when at 14 years of old, and it was the Battle of, Crécy or Poitiers, I can't remember which one it was, against the English. Everybody had left the battlefield except him, and he was trying to protect his father, the king, and he was only 14 years old. So he got the epithet of Philip the Bold. And in recognition for this, his father gave him the Duchy of Burgundy, which had belonged to somebody else before. And so this made him very rich. And then he married Marguerite of Flanders, from her father, she inherited a lot of the provinces of Flanders. And as I said, this is one of the richest areas of Northern Europe. So this made the House of Burgundy really rivals to the kings of France, and that didn't help their disposition against these people. So this young man managed to get this man, assassinated in 1419. So, I mean, it was not a very pleasant family to be a part of. Well, he dies and his son Louis XI takes over, and so does Charles the Bold, and they, of course, hate each other. So what Charles the Bold was trying to do after his father's death is, here is the Duchy of Burgundy and then the County of Burgundy, which was inherited by Marguerite of Flanders. And then here's the Burgundian lands that they controlled as well. And I guess they could part of Luxembourg. Well, what Charles the Bold was trying to do was connect these two, and he wanted to become a king because he was very powerful and very rich. But that did not work out, and he was trying to take control of these. He was always at war. People in the Flanders or Brabant, they really hated him. But eventually he was killed at the Battle of Nancy. And so what happens is Louis XI comes in and says, Charles leaves only a girl as his heir. And so Louis XI says, well, he produced no heir. And so he took all of this area away from the Burgundians. And then he took parts of this area as well for a while, but gave them back. So what happens is, here's Mary of Burgundy. And in order to save herself, she marries Maximilian of Habsburg, whose father was the Holy Roman Emperor. And Maximilian fights Louis XI. And in one of their battles, in order to have peacetime, he suggests that they send Mary. In the meantime, dies in a riding accident in 1482. She's only about 25 years old, but they had produced two children, Philippe and Marguerite. And Marguerite, when she was only 3 years old, was sent to France to learn to be the queen so that she could marry Louis XI's son, Charles VIII. And she was there for quite some time. In the meantime, when he gets to be a marital age, he decides he doesn't want to marry her. He wants to marry Anne of Brittany, who was the heiress to the whole Duchy of Brittany, and it was a big prize for the French. So the only problem is in the meantime, she had married Maximilian by proxy in 1490, and Maximilian was busy with problems in his own territory, so he couldn't get there to claim his bride. So she literally had the French army at the gates, and they said, well, your marriage isn't valued. He never came to claim you. So she marries Charles. So poor Marguerite is sent home. She's renounced and sent home. I guess she's about 10 or 11 years old by this time. And now he has no wife. So they are not very happy with the French, to make it plain. They hate the French. So in order to get back at the French, Maximilian arranges with Ferdinand and Isabella, and Isabella's over here someplace, to marry. Philip marries their daughter Juana, and Marguerite marries their son Juan. Juan dies after a few months, and Marguerite is sent home once again. But in the meantime, Philippe and Juana have 6 children, and they all live into adulthood, which is very unusual for this time. And their most important child is this young boy right here, who becomes Charles V. And Charles V is Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He controls all of the Netherlands. He controls a lot of Italy. He controls Castile and Aragon and the New World. So the sun literally never sets on the empire of this little boy. And that's when the Habsburgs kind of take over everything. Anyway, so how did Bosch become from a painter from a provincial town, become popular with Netherlandish nobility. In 1486-87, he joined the Brotherhood of Our Lady, a confraternity which had about 15,000 members all over Northern Europe. But after a year, he was asked to join the governing body, the Sworn Brothers, a small elite group of about 100 people. Another new member at this time, 1487-88, was a certain Canon Jan van Gleems, who happened to be the cousin of this man, Jan II van Gleems, the Lord of Bergen op Zoom. A few years later, Bosch paints the painting of this man. So I think that they joined at the same time. And when you join a group and you're the newbies, you kind of probably develop a relationship. And I think that's what happened between Bosch and this canon. He was a canon, Jan van Gleems. And I think it was canon Jan van Gleems that introduced him to this very important and influential family. And that's how he came to be working for them. The other thing is, when Princess Juana came to the Netherlands, and she had made this arduous trip through the English Channel, and she had lost half of her trousseau, had gone down there were a whole bunch of ships, but I think they lost about half the ships, which included all the stuff that her parents had given him for her wedding. So she's not feeling well. So she arrives in the Netherlands in August, and she spent 2 weeks recovering from this ordeal through the English Channel. And where she is she goes to this town, Bergen op Zoom, and stays with the Van Gleems family, because their parents told her to do that because they were very pro-Spanish. And while she is there, she is his Jan van Gleems, the second son, who by now is Jan III van Gleems, his heir, and his wife had a baby, a little baby girl, and they named her Joanna after Juana. And Juana was one of the godmothers, and she was she held the baby over the stoop, or where they put the water on the baby's head to baptize her. And so it had to have been in the family chapel. And so she probably saw this painting, because we know she was probably had to go to the chapel. She would have anyway, because she would have gone to mass every day. So then in December 1476, she's married Philippe now, and she's the Archduchess of the Netherlands, or whatever names they called her. And they visit Bosch. And we think what happened is that there was these paintings that end up in the inventory of Queen Isabella, her mother. And they found out that what it was really was that Juana, they think it was Juana, had sent a painting, and it says it's a woman with long hair by Bosch, or by Hieronymus. And they found this in Isabella's inventory, in her possession. And what had happened was that Juana had probably commissioned it from Bosch, sends it to her sister, who is the Queen of Portugal at the time, and not doing very well. And the Queen of Portugal then gives birth to a baby and dies. And so then all of her possessions end up with Queen Isabella. But it points out that Juana was probably the first royal patron that Bosch had. And of course, this elevates him. I'm sure it really increases his status. And one of the things that these, maybe not so much Juana, because the Spanish were very conservative, but the Netherlanders were a little more out there. Always, they still are. I mean, I love them dearly, but it's quite a place to visit. Anyway, but the one of the reasons the Netherlanders, the elite of the Netherlands, liked Bosch is because they were known to appreciate marvelous and strange work of art. They sought out ambiguity and paradox, double meanings and impossibilities and delightful oddities, because they thought this would be a source of wit and pleasure and self-renewal. And of course, Bosch is very good at all of this. He could, take these very traditional themes and turn them into something quite different. And this is exactly what he's doing in The Conjurer. what he's doing is there is a series called The Children of the Planets that appeared for the first time. This is this illuminated manuscript from Tübingen is of the children of the planets. And they show that all the children born under certain planets, including the sun and the moon. And so this is the children of the moon, had certain characteristics, just like in astrology. And so one of the things they decided was that the children born under the moon had were like the moon. In other words, they were inconstant, seldom stayed in one place, given to falsehoods, and likely to be merchant seamen, messengers, millers, conjurers, and bird fowlers. And here is the conjurer in this early scene of 1404, playing cups and balls before a crowd of people. And the miller, of course, always cheated people when they brought their flour to them. There was seeds to be milled. They always thought that he was cheating them, you know, it goes on and on. And then this person right here is a bird fowler, and I'll talk more about him later. Here's his owl, and he's trying to trick birds with his nets and so on and so forth. Anyway, Bosch seems to have taken from one of these, and there were a lot of these Children of the Planet manuscripts in prints. So it wasn't something that was uncommon. I think what he did was he took one of these, and here he's showing a crowd of people, and he's showing this conjurer, and the conjurer is one of the things that's different about this scene is he's showing it as a magic trick. This one is shown as a scene of thievery. And basically what you have is this man right here is reaching around and he's stealing this woman's purse, as you can see right here. So in none of the other examples, the man that wrote, Kurt Volkman, wrote a book about cups and balls and art. And he says that none of the others show this the scene of somebody, they never have an accomplice, but this one does. And he said the other thing that's very odd about this one is, first of all, he's shown as fat, and you never see a fat conjurer. I mean, they were street people. They didn't have the wherewithal to become fat. And then he's also shown with two swords. He's got a short sword tucked under a belt, and then this long fighting sword. And those kinds of swords, you would never have a street person would have something like this. This is the purview of hunters and professional hunters and professional soldiers, or the nobility. They're the ones that had these kind of armaments, and they were probably more likely to be fat because they had more access to food. So he said, you know, he wondered what was going on with this. It doesn't make any sense. So what it looks to me like what Bosch was doing is he probably did this preliminary sketch and then decided, no, this wasn't going to work, because what he's trying to show is that the conjurer, which he's traced, the conjurer is no longer the fat heavy person. He puts him, he's still there, but he's in the middle of the painting and he's wearing green, and the conjurer is somebody else. And what Bosch is trying to show is that the person here, who is probably the patron, was he triumphed over adversity, and he was also playing some tricks on some world-class entities. And so that's what it's about. And so this works much better than this did. But you have to know the whole story. So this, I think, is Jan van Gleem's the third, the son of the man that was in the Christ carrying the cross. And here he is, he's wearing green and he's smiling. He's the only person that's smiling, and everybody else, you'll notice, is wearing red or cream or black or brown. So all these, you know, probably sort of not very interesting color, but he stands out because he's in the middle and he's wearing green and he's smiling. So what is all of this about? Well, what he's wearing is a hunter's green costume. And this is a costume worn during spring and summer for hunters when they're out hunting. I don't know. I think mostly they chase stags in the spring and summer. And he's the only person who's smiling. And he has the same same sort of fleshy face with this long Potomac nose. It's a long nose with extra flesh and kind of small eyes, and he's heavy set. And Jan III was a soldier, a knight of the Golden Fleece. He was the head of the pro-English party at the Habsburg Burgundian court, first chamberlain to Maximilian of Austria in the 1480s, then to Maximilian's son, Philippe le Beau. And he had a very prestigious position as huntmaster of Brabant since he was about 20, a highly regarded position in a society where hunting was the pastime around the life of the court revolved. His hunting prowess might have been his reason for his close friendship with Maximilian, as Maximilian's skill and passion for hunting were legendary. He probably was one of the world's greatest hunters from then even till now. Jan III held this hunting position until he had a falling out with Philippe le Beau, and on Philippe le Beau and Juana's first trip to Spain in 1502, when Philippe became enraged over Jan III's anti-French position on critical issues. He stripped Jan of all of his official positions, including Master of the Hunt, giving it to his chief rival, Willem de Croy, and sent him home in disgrace. Jan was out of power for years, but things changed. In 1507, Jan III was back at court, named to a prestigious office, and on March 17th, reappointed huntmaster. Thus, he has shown the hunting green costume of the spring hunts, which coincides with the date of his reappointment, and he's smiling, meaning he's back in power. This means the painting had to have been painted after March 17th, 1509, when he was reappointed Master of the Hunt. Well, next to Jan is a young man with downcast eyes, dressed in brown garments worn by hunters in fall and winter. This man's name is Philibert, Duke of Savoy, and here's a portrait of Philibert. Next to him is his wife, Marguerite of Austria. Now, she had been married for, I guess, the third time. I guess she was engaged once, and then she married Philibert in about 1500, 1501. Well, Philibert preferred hunting to governing, a task he willingly gave over to his very capable wife. However, his passion for hunting proved his undoing. In September 1504, against his wife's advice, he went hunting despite suffering from the flu, caught a chill, and died, age 24. Again, Bosch uses the color of the hunting costume to indicate when these important events occurred in the lives of both Jan III and Philibert II. Was their hunting and their association with the death of one and the success of the other. Marguerite was now twice widowed, at 24. So she cut off her beautiful blonde hair and put on widow's weeds. This was clothing worn by many well-to-do widows in the Middle Ages to protect themselves from greedy suitors. And they consisted of a black gown, a veil, and a barb, a piece of white linen fixed to the narrow band around the face and covering the shoulders. She wore widow's weeds for the rest of her life. She wanted to retire to a nunnery, but fate had other plans. These plans included the young couple standing nearby, Marguerite's brother, Philippe le Beau, and his wife, Juana of Castile. She is distinguished by her red hair, which she inherited from her mother, Isabella of Castile. And her hat is jauntily tilted with a feather so that it shows off her hair. Red hair is most commonly found in both Western and Eastern fringes of modern Europe, Britain, Scotland, Ireland, Turkey, and Iran. Her mother, Isabella, with her English ancestry, had strawberry blonde hair, which was much commented upon in Spain due to its rarity. The same was probably true for Juana in the Netherlands. A scholar researching the conjurer found this type of hat was worn 1500 to 10. He also found that Philippe's black furred hat, identical to the one, it was identical to one worn in a painting that dated 1502 to 1508. Without knowing the rest of the story on the conjurer, based on these fashions, he dated the conjurer to 1510. Ferdinand and Isabella's oldest son and daughter had died before Isabella's own death in 1504, and her kingdom descended on Juana and Philippe. Unfortunately, Philippe died only a few months after their arrival in Spain in 1506, leaving Juana completely distraught. She's known to history as Juana la Loca, and completely incapable of ruling Castile or taking care of their 6 children. Her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, took over ruling Castile, and Marguerite was persuaded by Maximilian and Jan III, who was a very close friend of hers, to return to the Netherlands as regent. Juana spent the rest of her life locked up in a castle in Spain, outliving everyone in the painting except the little boy whose hand that she appears to be holding. And that is Charles, her son, Charles V. He's got sort of reddish hair. You can see it's the same color hair in both paintings. This was done he was about 1510. And the interesting things is Bosch has given him a windmill, and it's a toy, and some people say, oh, it's a whirligig. It's not a windmill. It's a windmill. And this is really a reference to the Netherlands. And there's a book on Dutch windmills that says, the author states that in ancient times, the wind belonged to the sovereign monarch. In other words, it was the monarch in the Netherlands who determined where you could build windmills. So basically, the prince owned the wind. And so after the death of his father, Charles literally owned the wind in the Netherlands. Bosch also used red lake paint right here, and over here to connect these people. And that's a typical thing for Bosch to do, is to connect people or things through the coloring that he uses. This is actually Juana's father-in-law and Charles' grandfather, the Emperor Maximilian. Now, Maximilian was a vigorously ugly man with a prominent hooked nose, protruding lower lip, and a pronounced jaw, as seen in his portrait. These features are drawn with a black line here, and I don't know if you could see it, but you can see right here, originally there's a black line to show this bump in his nose, but in the painting, it's not filled in. They did the same with his chin, and you can even see right here, there's a line where the brick is, and it goes all the way to here, and there's a line right here where they had a more pronounced jaw or chin, but in the painting, they didn't fill this in with flesh-colored paint, and they didn't fill this in. So it doesn't look exactly like Maximilian. And of course, they probably did that for political reasons, because of course, Maximilian had just given him all these very important jobs to do. So he wasn't, Maximilian was known for having a sense of humor, but he was also very self-conscious. So you had to be very careful with these, highfalutin people, I suppose. But then he does something else for Maximilian, and I'm sure Maximilian appreciated the joke. Using carnivalesque inversion, he gives him a trick dog, which you can see here, and this owl in a basket. And usually, when you're a noble and you're a great hunter like Maximilian was, in fact, you always have a dog by your side, a hunting dog, and you're usually on your wrist, you're holding a falcon or some bird of prey. And this, if you see that in a painting, it always signifies that that person is a noble, because only nobles have the money to spend for training these falcons or hawks, whatever they were, as birds of prey, to go hunting for them, because you could release your bird and off he went, and all that money and expense that you've gone to is gone, and the bird's not coming back. So it was only the very wealthy. So it's always a symbol of the nobility, as are the hunting dogs. Of course, they were the only ones that were really allowed to have them. So what he does is he's showing him as a bird fowler. And with that, Maximilian is with Bosch is going back to the bird hunter here, and here's another bird fowler. Now, bird fowlers were peasants, and they were considered this was considered the lowest form of hunting. And one writer of a Gaston Fibu wrote that they should be strung up, because as far as he was concerned, because they did not respect their prey, because they tricked them, whereas the nobles respected their prey. They still hunted them down and killed them, but whatever. So what a bird fowler would do, he might hide. This one shows him playing a lute or something like that, or flute, but they would tie an owl right here up in a tree, or here's the owl right here. And then they would, and birds hate owls. And so the birds would fly in to attack the owl. Well, what the bird hunter would do is he would have bird lime on the branches of the trees so the birds would come in and they would get stuck to the branches. And then the bird fowler would just go out and pluck them off. And so it was a very easy catch. Now, here we see Bosch. This is one of his most famous drawings. And you see the owl in a tree, and here are birds flying in to attack the owl. So he was very familiar with this phenomenon. And so he's showing Maximilian instead of a great hunter, who always had his favorite hunting dog and his favorite hunting falcon with him, even when he was going to war, because he said, you never know when the hunting opportunity is going to present itself. So I always want to be ready. So basically what you have is a bunch of people that are associated with the Habsburgs and Maximilian Habsburg himself, and they're all crowded around this table. But then there's this mark. So what's going on with this mark? And I think that it's this is Cardinal George d'Amboise, and Cardinal d'Amboise ran France for the King Louis XII, who had replaced Charles VIII. And Louis XII also had married Anne of Brittany when she was a widow. And he's wearing not the strict costume of a cardinal, but this is called an almus. And in the early days, they were used to cover the head and shoulders when cold churches. And then this is an early form of beretta. And then he's wearing a red robe. And what Bosch has done, see, doesn't look like this or this. It has a shine to it. And what I think he's trying to do is show the shine of the silk garments that were worn by cardinals, which he was. And of course, it would make sense that they were trying to trick the French, because they hate the French, right? So, and the other thing about Bosch is he gave him a traveler's hat that's worn by people that travel around. And that was because that Maximilian was known for his peripatetic lifestyle. Maximilian wrote, "God knows I'm terribly tired of traipsing around from place to place, and I only do it because of my poverties." And he was always trying to keep ahead of his creditors, because despite his lofty title as the emperor, which was the highest in Europe, above kings and princes, he owed money to everyone, including his children. So why are the Habsburgs playing a trick on this mark? Well, a lot of people call this person, they say it's a woman, but you can see he's got an Adam's apple right here, and he's also swallowing a frog. And I think this is Cardinal George d'Amboise, and Cardinal d'Amboise is shown from his tomb, and then here's a drawing, an engraving that is from the tomb as well. As one of the things about the cardinal is he governed France for Louis XII, and he organized several successful military expeditions into Italy for them. As successful as the French were at war, they often failed to secure their victories because the cardinal let France's neighbors or enemies take advantage of him. This is because he wanted to become pope, and his foes knew this. They would promise him their cardinals' votes that they controlled at the next papal conclave, but if he would give in to them. But no one in Europe was going to let the French king's best friend become pope. You'll notice the key hanging from his waist. And here's a St. Peter's keys, and by Bosch. And Bosch obviously knows how to draw real keys, but you look at this key and you see that it's flat here. It has no teeth. And what he's saying is, you will never have the keys of St. Peter's. You will never be able to open the gates of heaven with St. Peter's keys. And of course, that's exactly what happened. He never became Pope, but he kept trying until he died in 1510. The cleric who is stealing Bosch, the keys, or the purse, excuse me, is probably supposed to be Julius II. He was earlier Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. In 1492, when Pope Alexander Borgia was elected, Cardinal della Rovere fled to Avignon in France, fearing he'd be murdered. He persuaded the French under Charles VIII to invade Italy, hoping they would force out the Pope. The French did win a great deal of territory in Italy without much of a fight, but Alexander VI charmed Charles VIII, and Giuliano's hopes were dashed. He returned to Avignon, still pretending to be a friend to the French. When Louis XII ascended the throne in 1498, claiming that he claimed he was the real heir to the Duchy of Milan through his grandmother, a daughter of the last Visconti, Duke of Milan. He invaded Milan and won. Giuliano rode with the king into a conquered Milan, allowing the king and his cardinal friend d'Amboise to believe he was still on their side. When Alexander VI died in 1503, Giuliano publicly professed to support Cardinal d'Amboise, but secretly plotted to win the papacy for himself, which he did. Known as the warrior Pope, great Giuliano, or Pope Julius II, was greatly feared, so little wonder Bosch has disguised him more than the others. I believe the man standing at the back here is Ferdinand of Aragon, who is really also part of this family. He has dark hair like Ferdinand did and seems to have Ferdinand's 5 o'clock shadow. His position is characteristic of this clever and very greedy and unscrupulous king. He would agree with the latest conspiracy against another ruler, hold back, let others take the lead while awaiting the outcome before he decided which was the more advantageous side to take. This is exactly what he did during the War of the League of Cambrai, when he, Julius II, and Maximilian conspired to dupe the French. The League was started by Julius because he was angry at the Venetians because they conquered territory belonging to the papacy. He was joined by the others who also had interest in Italy and wanted to punish the Venetians. All three rulers hated the French as well. The chief representative of the League, Marguerite of Austria, and Cardinal d'Amboise met in Cambrai in late 1508 to discuss going to war with Venice. Marguerite had to pretend the past was forgiven about how she was thrown out of France and charmed d'Amboise, whom she had known as a child. Jan III, her closest advisor, and in England at the time, counseled her from afar. She persuaded the cardinal to have the French forces attack Venice first. Then the rest would join in. But in fact, what they were hoping, the conspirators were hoping that the French would lose and it would weaken them. D'Amboise stupidly agreed, and Bosch depicted him swallowing frogs. You can see the frog right there, which means avaler les grenouilles, being gullible in French. Imagine these schemers' shock when the French won the Battle of Agnadello against the Venetians on May 14th, 1509. While the French, for all their efforts, only received back land they'd already given to the Venetians several years earlier, the other Leaguers divided up huge chunks of Italian territory. One writer stated, at the League of Cambrai, the intrigues and artifices of diplomatic treachery sprang into a rank luxuriance of perfection. Not surprisingly, the League of Intrigue collapsed in 1510. Who else but Bosch could have depicted this treacherous shell game of the high and mighty in such a humorous and memorable way? Thus, The Conjurer actually depicts Jan van Gleem's return to power and a political satire on the League of Cambrai. I think one of the things that intrigued me the most about this is the way that he depicts Juana. And she is so close to the painting that was done by a man named Juan de Flandes. And you'll notice that he even has the hand up in the same way, but he gives it to her husband, Philippe. And she's even wearing a necklace, you know, I mean, it's so close. It's so close. He must have had access to this portrait. And I wondered why he would show her, she is the most beautifully painted. And everybody else is sort of dark, and she's much lighter. And she's at the end of this crowd of people. So you notice her, and she is also taller than everybody. In fact, she's the same height as the man that I think is her father. And I wondered why this might have happened. And of course, you have to remember that Juana was probably his Bosch's first royal patron. And the other thing is that when the French had gone into, when Philippe le Beau and Jan III, these two people, this person and this person, had this big falling out in Spain. And they had this huge argument. Juana stepped in and came to Jan III's defense and trying to, get her husband to stop arguing with him. And she and her mother, Queen Isabella, begged Philippe not to dismiss Jan III and pleaded with Jan III not to leave. They were unsuccessful, but the two women did give some good mounts to Jan III and his party for their humiliating trip home. So although Juana was no longer present in the Netherlands, she's locked up in the castle in Tordesillas in Spain, Bosch and Jan III owed this unhappy princess a debt of gratitude and rendered her portrait in the Conjurer in a special way. It is by far the closest to her portrait. I was never able to quite figure out who this man was, but I think it might be the Duke of Gelders. Here's Nijmegen, where's Gelders, and they were always causing problems, invading Hertogenbosch. So Bosch probably didn't like him very well. And I found a letter from Marguerite right before she leaves for Cambrai. She's writing to Henry VII of England, asking for advice. And she says, oh, the Duke of Gelders and agreed to a ceasefire or a truce while we're negotiating this treaty in Cambrai. And so I found this picture. It's a later copy of an earlier picture. So it might be this man, or it might be this is Willem de Croy, who is the great rival of Jan III van Gleems, who took over as the Huntmaster of Brabant when Jan was thrown out of power, but then it was taken away from him and given back to Jan III. So I'm not really sure which person that is, but I think it might be this person. Anyway, that sort of concludes my talk. I did want to say that here are one of the reasons that they think that it's not by Bosch is when you look at these faces that are done in the underdrawing. I mean, they're not very good. They're practically they're really horrible. And so they say, well, he didn't do stuff like that. Well, he probably didn't, but anybody could do the underdrawings. And what they said was that these faces were left in reserve. That means they painted all the costumes and then went in and somebody painted the faces. And so I think that might have been, that's very typical of a patron to demand that it's the master of the studio that does the faces because they're the hardest to do. And also this engraving, it's not a very good reproduction, by Balthazar van der Bos in about 1550, 60, says that this was the Conjurer and it was by Hieronymus Bosch. So even in the late 16th century, they were saying that this was by Bosch. So, and then you can see these are little changes right here where he moves the key. That's typical of a person that is the master, is not. And then here, he had a light coat on with a dark collar, and then it's turned all dark. So there's another change. And then the eyes were going to be here, and now they're up there. So there's another change. And then he changed a lot of stuff along. You can see right here, they were going to put this part of the cups and balls here, and they moved the wand and so on and so forth. And I think they moved the dog, but you can't see it. Anyway, so those are some of the reasons why I think it's definitely by Bosch. And at least the design is. So, any questions?
Diana, would you mind stopping the sharing so we can see everybody? Stopping sharing. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we have a couple of questions here. So Tom,
Well, actually, I had a few, but I'll just pick on one. One of the things about moving, Bosch's father moving to another location, um, it's just part of the way things were at the time, that these arts were sort of like crafts. So they were actually looked at as purveying a craft.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They weren't, if I think maybe the first one that sort of got star status was Jan van Eyck, because he worked for the Duke of Burgundy and, was a good friend of the Duke of Burgundy's. But I think pretty much, and the Lindbergh brothers had sort of star quality too. There were some artists, but by and large, yeah, they, they did things like they painted the railings. They got money for painting the railings in the church, or regilding a statue and stuff like that. So, and then another thing that they did all over Bosch, and I don't know where else, but they would paint the beams of the ceilings in the houses, all those wooden beams. Well, people thought that they were boring, I guess. And they still have some of them left. They don't know who did them, but it's quite possible that it was by the Bosch family, and that could have been their bread and butter. So, being decorative artists, and they'd paint shields for, the processions and stuff like that. So there was a need for, journeyman artists, but they, they never made much, none of that family except Jan's Hieronymus Bosch's father ever was able to own a house. So yeah, they were pretty much journeymen.
Thank you. I'll reserve my questions till later if there's any time left. My other questions till later.
so Alvin, you're next.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I guess my question is, so what are the counter arguments of that organization that demoted this painting? What are their counter arguments to your interpretation? It must be something they're saying as well.
Yeah, well, it's mainly the underdrawings of the faces. They don't like that. And they say that's not Bosch. They didn't like the fact that a lot of the paintings, except Juana's, had a lot of blue streaks in the faces, and they said Bosch never did that. So that was another mark against it. And they ignored the fact that there are a lot of changes to the underdrawings. They just ignored that part. And they said, well, it's just too simple. It's too simple. But if you know the story, you realize it's not too simple. But yeah, and that was their main objection. And then there was another one. They said that there had been a working frame on the painting. So it was what the artist had, and then it was removed, and another type of frame, it was a rabbited frame, they said, was put on. And that was not done, that was popular until the 1520s. And so that was another mark against it, because it had a frame that Bosch wouldn't have put on it. Well, the man that owned the painting lived to 1530, so he could have easily had a better frame put on it, because he was an aristocrat, right? So that was another one of that rabbited frame, change the frame. So yeah, that was another, but it wasn't, without knowing the story, it probably, you think, well, it's too simple. It's not as complex. The other thing that I didn't show you was there in the oculus, in the wall behind, there's a bird. It looks like a stork in a nest. And you've got the frogs. And of course, I think that there's a wonderful article about how in the 17th century that the Netherlanders were always calling the French toads, and there was a legend behind this, why they did this, and they also ate frogs too. So what was that? French ate frog. So I think that anytime, I think it goes back earlier, then I think anytime you see a frog in a Bosch painting, scholars always say, it's evil, it's evil. And that's what it means, but I think it means the French. And I think they're always digging on the French, they just, because they hate them, because they've done a lot of mean things to them. Anyway, and so in the Netherlands in the Middle Ages, thousands upon thousands of storks used to come from Egypt and migrate up to the Netherlands to feast on the frogs that were in all the marshes. And so there was somebody that wrote, he said, there's a saying that comes from a 12th century book or 13th century book. And so it's not just that he's showing them that he's swallowing frogs, that he's being gullible, but it's a reference to the French. And there was a saying, let's see, anyway, about woe to the frog that goes into the house of the stork. And I think that sort of sums up the whole story of the war, the League of Cambrai. It's the French being gullible and going into the house of the stork and getting trounced. But they did win, but they didn't end up with very much.
Thank you.
Dorothy.
I was very interested in this figure who was clothed in green in both the cross procession and in the other one. And it looked like it was the same person. I mean, the face was very similar. And as you pointed out, it could well have been the Van Gleams. But you talked about pilgrim, but was the green there to emphasize the person? Everything else was red in the picture, and that person was
right.
kind of green. But also, or was it a symbol of pilgrim? Were the pilgrims often in green?
I think I remember reading something, but that some pilgrims from certain countries wore a different color clothing, but that didn't apply to the Netherlands as far as I could find out. I'd have to look it up again. But the big thing is that pilgrims hat. And that was the sign of a pilgrim. They wore these great big floppy hats to protect them from the sun. And he's got it pinned back so he can see a little bit better. But that was a typical pilgrim's outfit. And then you wore a cloak, and you usually carried a staff. He's not shown carrying a staff, but he is wearing the cloak. But that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that they're both in green. Interesting. But he was probably a hunter too. I mean, if you were a noble, you were a hunter. You had to be a hunter, or you just weren't a man, right? So, believe in the women like to hunt. Mary of Burgundy died when she loved to hunt with falcons, and she was riding a horse, and the horse fell on her, and she eventually died. But yeah, they love to hunt, and I think the hunting thing is brought home time and time again. There's references to it, and it was such a big part of their lives, and we forget that. There's only certain people that hunt anymore. But in those days, in France, of course, it's still a big deal. I have a French friend that lives down the hall from me, and she said on her 18th birthday, she was given a big gun so she could go hunt with her relatives. So
on the painting with the cross, there was one man who was holding a sort of a string up above him. Was that a whip?
Yeah, I think so. A scourge.
Scourge, okay.
To scourge Christ as he was struggling with the cross, trying to hold up the cross. And then you see the man Simon of Cyrene is helping him. The man in white is helping him lift the cross.
So I had one question. So it seems to me, so this is really a biting satire, this whole painting. And I was wondering, the people at that time, would they easily recognize who the characters were? And if so, it seems to me it would be dangerous for the painter to be painting such biting satire.
Well, exactly. And that's why a lot of it's hidden, because it looks like a scene of, a conjurer, which everybody was familiar with from the Children of the Planet. But, and you notice the faces aren't exact duplicates except for Juana's, and she's no longer around. So it was sort of like it was okay. But they changed the face of Marguerite, and they changed the face of her father. And so, yeah, you had to be careful. But then he puts in these other things that identify them, like she's not dressed exactly in widow's weeds, but she's dressed as a nun. And so it was the same thing. So, yeah, so that's one of the ways, that's the way he hides it. And yes, it was probably very dangerous. And I have a feeling that there was more of a fallout about some of these paintings than we know. Yeah. Especially the Temptation of St. Anthony. I think there was a big fallout over that. And it might have been the argument that they had in Spain when he got kicked out, because he probably had something to do with it. I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did.
Well, we're past 3 o'clock, so let's make this the last question. No, Alvin, if you could, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be very quickly. The Conjuro or Maximilian is holding something in his hand, and it's so prominent in the painting. What is he holding, and doesn't that have some significance?
Yeah, well, I think he's doing the cups and balls trick. So, when a magician is doing that, he's saying, okay, here's this little ball, and I'm going to put it under this cup. And then they move the cups around, and the trick is you're supposed to figure out where the ball is. So that's what he's holding it up to show you. It's okay, I have this real ball. See, I'm going to put it under this cup. And then they move the cups around. Usually what they do is,
so it's visibly a ball.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or he'll make it disappear with the wand, and they probably, just let it drop into their hand on the edge of the table or something. I don't know how magicians do, but mostly it's a magician's trick. And somebody pointed out that this painting is actually, it's more of a shell game. And the shell game is where you're not just doing a magic trick, you're enticing the mark in, and the people crowd around him so he can't get away. And then one of the accomplices says, hey, see, this is really easy, and he shows, oh, I'm going to make some money off of this. And so the mark keeps betting, and they keep closing in around him so he can't get away. And so that's called a shell game. So there's two types. There's the cups and balls, the trick, and then there's the cups and balls, the shell game. And the funny thing is that in France in the 1970s, somebody used that as a cartoon, and has Valerie Giscard d'Estaing and Uncle Sam and the Brits around the table, and they're doing a shell game about the euro. And of course, we got the euro anyway, but and other people have used it the same way to show so somebody got it. They understood what it was, but they probably didn't really know what the actual story was, that it was in fact a shell game.
I think we need to stop because it's really way past 3 o'clock, unless, Diana is willing to continue answering questions. This is so
sure.
fascinating. But
AM has a hand up.
okay, let's take one more. Yeah, AM. Okay, she disappeared. Tom?
When will the board reconvene to evaluate your finding again?
You're talking to me when they're going to, you mean the Bosch, the BRCP?
Yes.
I have no idea. The paper is going to be published in November in the conference papers, but finding the conference papers is almost impossible. I've looked for them on the internet many, many times, and they're never available. You have to, do a special deal with the Bosch Center to get the conference papers sent to you. But what I did for the last one is I put in some revisions and put it up on Academia edu, and most of the people that write on Bosch do that as well. They put their papers up on Academia edu, so it's sort of getting to be a whole community of Bosch information. But whether they'll change their minds, I really feel sorry for the people in France that own this. The museum in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, they had it stolen at least once, maybe twice, and they didn't have it secure enough space to exhibit it. So they would give it to exhibitions that did have security, but you couldn't see it. And then I met somebody at one of these conferences that knew the curator, and she took me down into the basement to see it. And I could see a lot of different things that, you can't see in reproductions. It's really very helpful. But, and I think that museum is closed, but in 2016, they came to the conference that was held then, and they sort of were begging that their Bosch not be kicked out. They were really upset, and didn't get anywhere. So, but I think I'm going to write to them and say, and I told the women, you have a treasure here. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not going to tell you why, and so I think I'll send her my paper. But of course, it's anti-French, so there's that. Maybe they won't appreciate that. So.
Okay, Tom, absolutely last question.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I guess there was another Tom. It's idiosyncratic, but you had the painting of the Holy Family. It is in the 1470 to 1480 painting, and described as rather awkward. I guess I've been looking at art as the wrong way for a while now, because I've always sort of found those sorts of things rather charming.
Oh yeah, they are. I'm just saying his technical ability was still being developed.
Yeah, and
he got better.
Yeah, and it seems like in a lot of this he got better, okay, but somehow then it lost the charm of it had not only his but other artists. I think are like that. But I guess that's it. That it's I guess it's all in your point of view and the way you appreciate things.
Part of it, I think, is that he was painting for a very sophisticated crowd. That's what they wanted, and that's what they were going to pay him for. They liked that sort of weird stuff, and I always say he was a guy trying to make a buck. Part of it. I mean, he's an artist trying to make a living. Mm-hmm. And although he didn't have to work that hard because his wife was pretty well off, but even so, I mean, somebody pays you a lot of money to do something, and that sparks your creative juices, and you're going to say, oh, well, I can bring in this, and I can, he had a vivid imagination to bring in all of this stuff that was around, but people didn't use it like that. He brought in all that, the marginalia from the illuminated manuscripts that nobody had used in a regular painting. I mean, you just didn't do that, but here he comes, and people loved it. So I think it's not like any other advance that people make, and they did a lot but the artists of the 16th century, when they were influenced by Bosch, I mean, they did a lot of really ugly paintings. His are nicely done pretty much, but some of them are pretty bad, but that's what sold. So everybody wanted a Bosch, and that's one of the reasons that the Sergeant Bosch has nothing left. They sold everything. They had altarpieces and portraits and this and that and the other thing, and by the 17th century, there was nothing left in Bosch because they'd sold it all. to collectors who were wild. And the other thing is Philip II, the King of Spain, loved Bosch. And that, of course, when you have a royal person that likes that is just a fanatic about it, that makes a difference, you know. So that's why Spain has most of the Bosch paintings. And I think, frankly, a lot of them were taken from this family. He accused the son of, well, the grandson of Jan III was accused of treason, and he did nothing treasonous, and he probably had him killed because he was in Spain and he wouldn't let him go. And it was the Netherlands was having problems. This was the time of the Duke of Alva coming in and killing a lot of people in Antwerp and so on and so forth, because of it was because of religion. And Jan IV was a Catholic. He was a loyal Catholic, but the Netherlanders believed freedom of thought. And they thought that if you wanted to be a Protestant, that was okay. And the Spanish king didn't agree with that. And he was going to put an end to it. And so he accused him of treason, and that gave him the right to take everything in all of their houses down to the buttons and sell them at auction or keep them. And so that's when, right about that time, the Christ carrying the cross and a couple of the Haywain and a bunch of other paintings that I think belonged to this family ended up in Spain. So yeah, politics and art.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, I think we need to thank Diana for a wonderful talk.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Welcome.
Dorothy, do you have anything else you want to add, or?
It was a very nice talk. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry it's so complicated. It's such a simple painting, but there's so much. That's the whole thing. There's so much going on in it. And I just don't think, you know, anybody but Bosch could have conceived of it.
Yeah. It's great. It's so complicated. Thank you.
A lot of information. Yeah, thank you very much.